The Ishtar Cup, read by Eiland Jr.
Anyone might wonder why a private investigator would be addicted to reading novels about fictional practitioners of his profession, but I read them all the time. The simple fact is that I love my work, and even fictional accounts, especially fictional accounts, just seem to make a satisfying life all the better. Not that I'm anything like the losers who turn up in print. I enjoyed the last story I finished just yesterday, but the detective, a frustrated 30-ish woman with relationship problems, would, if real rather than a creation of some writer's imagination, earn the scorn of all private investigators I know. Not only does she drive a battered Volkswagen, but she usually is charged to the max on her credit cards, has a negative balance at the bank, and is being hounded by her landlord for payment of office rent. She gets involved with cases from which she has no hope of recovering a dollar, and there are times when she refuses payment if she believes the money would otherwise go to a more worthy cause. In addition to regular hospitalizations for injuries sustained in pursuit of dangerous criminals, she periodically gets romantically entangled with a married cop who will never provide any stability, consorts with juvenile delinquents, and speaks abrasively to the few people who might otherwise be inclined to make her life easier. It's pathetic, but fortunately just fiction. As for myself, Bartram Northcote, I am an honest man, but old-fashioned enough to believe what I deserve as a fair reward for a good day's work. And when I'm engaged by a client, I give it everything I can, at times working a solid 24-hour day. So I'm not ashamed to say that I have 2 cars, a new Lexus 400 coupe, and an older van with a faded but intact paint job, for use on jobs where the Lexus would be too conspicuous. Not that my work ordinarily takes me to the seamier parts of Los Angeles, as most of my clients are reasonably affluent and have business in and around Beverly Hills or Malibu. I've worked for the rich and famous, but can't mention names because I take that part of my confidentiality oath seriously. I've also made enough money to support a reasonable lifestyle. I live in a substantial house off the less lavish end of Bellagio Road in Bel Air. And I collect paintings and other fine arts. I own the small building on Sunset Boulevard in which I keep a modest, well-decorated office with a solitary secretary. On another floor, I keep a small office annex for security reasons, but this is unmarked and known only to my secretary and myself. It's labeled as a janitor's closet. So stories of impoverished private detectives, invented to elicit the reader's sympathies, are more fun to read about than to live. And I expect to be paid just like a doctor or lawyer. Not even the police work for free. So I attract an upscale clientele, and I could see at a glance that the woman in my office that afternoon fit all my specifications. I had kept her waiting about 20 minutes, as I customarily did, to let Concepcion, my secretary, casually elicit the kinds of information that clients don't often volunteer to me. She entered my office with a reserved poise and began to speak in a well-modulated voice, explaining that she had invested a great deal of money in delivering a priceless antique gold cup to a wealthy art collector, and she was worried about being cheated. As I spoke, I listened. As she spoke, I listened, taking notes, but directed most of my attention to an assessment of her. The clothing, or total outfit, came first. The designer purse, soft leather high heels, and extravagantly patterned short jacket, probably of cashmere or alpaca, where obviously it had been expensive, and the letter possibly from a Rodeo Drive boutique, and a black shirt and sweater, both also of fine wool, brought the total cost to somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500. The imponderable was her watch, which was either worth about $8,000 or somewhat less than $50, depending upon whether it was made in Switzerland or Hong Kong. I was inclined to believe it genuine. As for the woman herself, she was the real thing. The classic tall blonde with the traditional voluptuous figure which, despite the short jacket that did not meet in front, seemed to be revealed by broad hints with each gesture. It did not take a genius to see that she had full hips set off by an extra slim waist, and on top there was a living reminder of the old proverb, too much of a good thing is wonderful. And she had donned just the right accoutrements to show it all without being too obvious. The hair, for example, was probably naturally blonde, without being the currently fashionable platinum, and she had no doubt chosen the natural look with an awareness that it would always set her apart. Her lips were covered with the exact shade to give them emphasis upon a rather broad face. In contrast to the chiseled supermodel look, it's important to get some assessment as to what a woman, or a man for that matter, wishes to accomplish with the parts she puts forward for the world to see. Vanessa, as she introduced herself, without a last name, obviously wanted to be noticed, lusted after, but not thought of as a whore. It was a kind of marginally overstated class not unknown to Hollywood. She told her story without embellishment. While vacationing in Paris with an old friend they had met by accident, an old friend of his. This friend introduced yet another friend who happened to be an Iraqi diplomat, who drove them around Paris in a Mercedes limousine and treated them to the finest restaurants in that part of France. Soon they were joined by a fifth, an acquaintance of the original old friend, and during a wonderful month of rest and relaxation, all came to be even better friends and to feel particularly indebted to the free-spending Iraqi diplomat. They all came to appreciate and respect what a fine gentleman he was, and it was with sadness one day that they heard he was being recalled. As they inquired about the reasons, he slowly came to confide that it was likely being ordered to return to his own execution. Indeed, he had planned to defect for over a year, since his wife, a relative of Saddam Hussein, had left him and returned home. But it depended upon his being able to bring to market a fabulously wealthy antiquity that had been stolen from a provincial Iraqi museum and smuggled out of the country. Alas, he needed $600,000 to purchase this priceless object, and he had been unable to come up with the money, in spite of his having a wealthy collector in America who would pay $5 million for it. The idea that the four new friends could raise the necessary $600,000 each was suggested by them, and at first the diplomat refused. He did invite them to the embassy, however, where they met another Iraqi who casually pulled from a large leather case an object of incalculable beauty. This sublime work of art, as reflected in Vanessa's enthusiasm for life, at once became a beckoning beacon. She had obviously been smitten with it, and the diplomat, over objections from the other man, scraped a small sample from the base so that one of the friends could have it assayed. It was 20-karat gold, making the vessel obviously worth the $5 million, which would mean $1 million for each of the friends for the mere inconvenience of putting up $1,500 each, and of course the Iraqi would need $1 million to begin his new life in exile. This object doesn't happen to be a Maltese falcon by any chance. I could see this was no time to be playful, as she looked at me uncomprehendingly and explained. It's called the Ishtar Cup. She spoke in odd tones. It was allegedly excavated from the royal tombs of ancient Ur, and it had been in a provincial museum by the site. But someone has recently taken it from the country. With the oil embargo, she explained, this was happening to many antiquities in Iraq. The diplomat would smuggle it to America in a diplomatic pouch, deliver it personally to the four of them in Los Angeles, and accompany the group to the wealthy collector, who had already seen pictures and knew of the Ishtar Cup from his connections in the world of art and archaeology. Of course they trusted him, and within a few days had all found ways of getting their share of the money. "So he didn't show up?" Bertram asked. "And you think your investment is in danger?" "Not at all," she recoiled, suggesting she was more worried than she wished to appear. "He's not due for another few days, and I have every confidence he'll bring the cup. I'd trust Saki with a lot more than that if I had it." "So what's your concern?" "I just want to keep an eye on my partners." She sounded evasive. "If you must know, I don't fully trust all of them." Now I understood without knowing the details. The whole proposition sounded like a confidence game, but stranger things had been known to happen. Perhaps an Iraqi diplomat would show up with a great treasure, and they would all soon be a lot richer. But then there might be an ugly disappointment. I had a sudden image of this woman sitting before me, being consummately able to pull a con job of her own, but strangely vulnerable to someone else's manipulations, as though she would probably not be able to recognize the treachery of others. But there was no use drawing conclusions too early. So she made eye contact with the covert implication that she would be watching every facet of my answer. "Are you interested in taking my case?" "It sounds uncomplicated," I said naively. "I'll take it, but my services do not come cheap." She opened her purse and reached a black-gloved hand inside. "How much?" "1,000 a day." The figure did not seem to slow her down. "I cover minor expenses in that figure, but my major expenses, like airline fares, hotels if I have to travel, and other non-routine charges, are extra. Depending upon whether the job appears to be long or short, I expect to be paid some days in advance, and the rest is payable when the case is closed." "I'll give you 6,000 for 6 days." She began counting through a stack of $100 bills. "Please start tomorrow morning with a surveillance of the person I feel most likely to betray me." "Which one is that?" I had up to that point no idea she had a suspect. "Evan Whitaker." She spoke with no personal animosity. "I have a photograph, an old Los Angeles address, and a list of the kinds of places he might visit. I want to be certain he does not meet with the diplomat and cut out the rest of us by taking early delivery of the cup. I want to know where he can be found on delivery day. I'll follow him closely without giving him any idea he's being watched." Actually, I believe my message to him would be more effective if he knew he was being watched. I know Evan well enough to believe that while he may be tempted to turn traitor, he probably won't if he knows there's someone aware of where he is. It's a little unusual to follow a man with the idea that he should know he's being followed. That could encourage him to try to give me the slip. Somehow I had known that anything this woman asked would be just a little beyond mainstream. "Exactly," she smiled, with a warmth that no doubt resulted from long practice. She had a killer smile, and now I was getting the full benefit of her minor talents. It put me on guard. "And what if he simply confronts me and asks why I'm following him?" "Oh, you can't let him do that. You must give the whole thing an ominous air, as if he might be in some kind of danger. I want him scared straight, as the saying goes. I want Evan to know he can't double-cross me, or the rest of us can get away with it." "I think I understand." "And you must appear totally professional." "I am totally professional," I added, not so much an annoyance, but to make certain she understood that her money would buy the best. "Any more questions?" She seemed ready to terminate the interview. "I notice on this questionnaire you filled out for my secretary that you haven't given a last name." She looked surprised, apologetic, uncertain. "I don't have to give my name, do I?" "I can't work for you without it." I tried to sound non-threatening, knowing that many people wanted anonymity for the best of reasons. "Of course, it would be Strictly confidential between you and me. Oh dear, I did hope I wouldn't have to go that far. And you didn't leave an address. What if I had to get in touch with you? You have my beeper number, she answered confidently. If this would be enough. It's not that I'm investigating you, I reasoned. But I need a name for legal reasons. She turned in a manner some photographer had once told her presented her most stunning angle. I am Vanessa Vader. I had never run across that name before the Star Wars trilogy, but I've heard it 3 or 4 times since then, always under circumstances where the real name was withheld. And the withholder wanted this understood. Just write that on the form and fill in an address. I watched her write in a flowing script. Now sign it. She seemed less certain of this. How do you want me to report? What if I called you tomorrow? I won't be in until I've found your man, and I'm sure he's retired for the night. Then I'll call you the morning after, she answered, lowering her voice as if preparing a final dramatic exit. My, aren't we suspicious this morning? If God had given me more children, I would not have time for this job. She watched my facial expression to see how mellow I was feeling and then carried it farther. I would not have time to protect you from the evils of this world. So you think this evil woman will lead me astray? She already has. I can already feel you defending her. Obviously, I had no need of a wife or mother with Concepcion in my life, and I knew she would soon leap upon that sore point between us. Do you know what you need? She lowered her voice as though preparing to treat me to a blast of genuine wisdom, but I'd heard it all so many times. Actually, a wife was probably the last thing I needed, and I had no plans for finding one in the near future. I knew she meant well, and of course she neither coveted me for herself or her eligible daughters. If I had seemed receptive, however, she would probably have come forth with a cousin or a niece to run my life for me. No, I was perfectly safe from Vanessa Vader, and I did not need Concepcion to guide my choices.